guys, it's Nina from VRFocus. We are here at Open City Doc Fest with...
Hi, I'm Russ Harding. I'm a creative director in AR and VR experiences, and I work and have co-founded Conspexit Game Studio and Conspexit Studio.
Cool. So how did you get to the space that you are in now? What is your history? What were you doing before this?
So I suppose I've been at Sony for about 10 years. So when I joined Sony, I started working in iToy, which was about placing the player into an augmented game. And the player was actually augmented into the game. And then I guess when PlayStation 3 came about, we thought about, can we start augmenting the game into the player's living room? So I started working on iPet. And with that knowledge, we started looking at multiple markers and immersive sort of gameplay, and started working on things like Wonderbook. And then we had an early prototype of a VR headset, and there were a lot of similarities and crossovers between AR and VR, and sort of like, how do you immerse players? So we started experimenting and building prototypes along with the development of the hardware. Those prototypes started to become sort of, we created the Deep, or Ocean's Descent, which was part of the GDC announcement for VR for PlayStation. And subsequently developed those prototypes into sort of small game experiences that kind of showcase the experiences around PSVR. And now I guess I'm kind of, I work a little bit freelance in developing VR experiences, and I'm looking at AR to, I guess, empower players to help the visually impaired through gameplay, which is kind of quite different from working at PlayStation.
So the visually impaired, how and what are you doing to help them, and through what? Like, are you using a phone, are you using a tablet? How are you, is it glasses? How are you doing it?
So so as game makers, we've been working in AR and looking at AR technologies, and we've been looking at mobile platforms. And actually there's a lot of technology that we use in game making that actually would be very useful in translating information about the real world using a mobile device and a camera back to visually impaired users. So we've been looking at how we can help the visually impaired's mobility, and how we can start to detect objects and things that are in their way using a mobile and a camera. At the same time, we want that technology to become more intelligent so we can learn about the world. So we thought about, as game makers, we obviously all make games. Is there a game that we can make that we can get people to participate in collecting that information? And then can we use that information to help inform the application for the visually impaired and what those objects are? So it's, because our ambition is to create a game for everyone that everyone will play, but at the same time, it will help those that are visually impaired as well.
Is there a name for this? What's it called?
So the Conspexit is the application itself, and this is something that we're developing for the visually impaired. And then we actually have a game in itself, which is yet to be announced, that will just be a mobile AR game, which will be slightly different because it will allow people to collect data in the real world and allow us to share that.
Wow, that's the future. The differences between virtual reality and augmented reality, you work across both platforms. Yep. What do you think they are most useful for? Like, do you think an immersive story works better in virtual reality, and then for augmented reality it's something that's more social?
So I probably argue that they can both be social, and it depends on how you approach it. And I guess a lot of the experiences I've created in AR or VR have been more about immersing the player into a form of role play. And actually both mediums can do that. So, in the sense of AR, you can give people tools in the real world that are virtual, and they can interact with those tools and create gameplay using those tools, and you just can do exactly the same, slightly reversed in VR, where you give people hands or tools or weapons and immerse them in the world. So for me, they're really familiar stories. They're just slightly different in the way that you kind of approach them. It's all very much about immersing you into a role.
And is there a tip that you would give someone, or like young people out there who are interested in coming into the space? What would you recommend them to do? Is there, like, you look back in time, you look at yourself, you say, here's that one golden piece of advice.
Prototype rapidly, get things into VR or AR really quickly. and don't overwork on paper. You know, get things up and running and working, and craft the things that work and drop the things that don't work. Often we design things out and we think, you know, our best ideas on paper are going to be gold, and actually when you get them into the mediums, they're not. And actually it's the small things that suddenly become really powerful. So for instance, when we were working on the London Heist for PlayStation VR Worlds, you know, just picking up a cup, chucking it out of a car window, sounds pretty weak as a mechanic, but actually when you're in VR, it's really powerful. So sometimes you just discover those things. So getting things off paper and into game really quickly.
Just doing it, like physically doing it rather
and crafting
than
it.
just talking about
Yeah.
it. And is there like one piece of advice you'd say, like, just don't do it, it's not a good idea, really don't advise you to go there?
Oh, I suppose keep it simple. A lot of people are talking about navigating and moving through VR is a really complex problem, so don't start there. Start with the really simple stuff. Most people in the world and kind of, yeah, simple things have big impact in VR. So,
because you're doing it yourself.
Yeah.
During this panel here today at the event, what was it that people were asking? What were they interested in with regards to what you discussed?
I think what people are interested in is, I suppose historically games have been telling stories and interactively, and there seems to be a lot of interest around what's the level of interaction do you need? Do you need full gameplay to immerse people?
So that was something that you were talking about with regards to the depth where you were going underwater and deciding when do we, you know, add the interaction. And what was the answer? Me
is about kind of, well, again, it goes back to that thing, build it quickly and start to experience it. So start to build out your experience and emotionally map where you want the player or your user or viewer, what you want them to feel at various points. And then start to build your experience around those emotional beats. So
it sounds like do it first, go in and then see if it works or not. Like very much like improvisation and working with actors and seeing if it flows and if it works or not, hitting those emotional beats. Yeah.
I'm a real fan of creating previs or putting stuff in really roughly, putting in voice from just us reading it, you know, into microphones and just getting the thing kind of sketched out and just seeing what works and doesn't work.
Say you had unlimited amount of money, you could use any like software or application out there. What would be your dream experience that you'd make?
Oh, I suppose one day is like, for me, it would be able to create a world or a place where we start to use things such as machine learning, where you can place characters and they can understand the world. They start to understand a bit about you, and you can more dynamically interact with those characters.
You want to create the Matrix?
Yeah. Don't we all?
Fantastic. And is there a website that we can go to for looking at your projects and seeing what they're all about?
Yeah. If you go to Conspexitgames.com, you'll be able to see our announcement when we announce our new projects. Or I'm on Twitter at Rushar, which is RUSSHAR.
Well, thank you again so much for the interview. And head over to VRFocus.com if you want to find out any more about virtual reality or augmented reality. And I will see you there.
Thanks.
Cool. That's it. I